What's up and welcome back to another live stream benchmarking. You get the raw data here with on-screen capture. We're going to be doing a 5-way benchmark comparison with the RTX 3070 versus the RTX 4050 and 4060 and two more 4060s, at least for a few of the benchmarks. And then we're going to move on to more specific benchmarks between the Zephyrus G16 and G15. The G15, of course, came out in 2021. This is the laptop I've got right here. This is a laptop that I know has been used almost every day now for a couple of years. So this will be a good, I guess, follow-up review because I did a detailed review on this previously as well. And so I just know that it's going to be very interesting because I think a lot of people right now are going to be struggling picking between RTX 3000 series and RTX 4000 series. And I'm hoping today's live stream will help just a lot of people figure out which one they want to buy. And it's going to be super interesting because I actually don't know which laptop is going to win in this benchmark battle because we have RTX 3070, which we're going to go over the specs all in the G15 here in a moment, and then all the specs in the G16 as well. But the 3070 has way more CUDA cores, but it's on an older architecture, and it also doesn't feature frame gen. And we're going to be doing tests with frame gen and without frame gen today. So we're going to be able to see kind of the performance you leave behind in those frame generation games, as well as the performance potential gain in the raw rasterization if the 3070 can actually put out a higher FPS number or not. So it's going to be super, super interesting. Let's pop over to the specs. We're going to start with the Zephyrus G15 first. All right, so the Zephyrus G15. I bought this originally for $1799. All right, so it's an $1,800 laptop 2 years ago. Currently, you can buy this brand new on eBay for $14.99. It's one of the only places I saw selling it, but it was being sold by the official Best Buy account. So $14.99 is the current retail price of this RTX 3070 config with a really nice display, QHD display. So we've got a Ryzen 9 5900HS CPU in here. It's an 8-core, 13-thread part, okay? And it's not as high a wattage as what we're going to see in the Zephyrus G16. And the RTX 3070 has 8 gigs of VRAM, and it goes between 80 and 100 watts of GPU power. Now, the thing about the Zephyrus G15 is that it's got the Ryzen part, and the Zephyrus G16 has an Intel part. We're going to go over that in a second here. But the other big thing that's different besides the GPU is also the display. 2560 by 1440, 165 hertz, 318 nits, 93% Adobe RGB. Of course, this was my Spider 5 Elite, so it's basically underestimating, and it's very close to 100% Adobe RGB. Very awesome display in the Zephyrus G15. Not the super brightest display, but it's still very colorful, and it's a higher resolution display, 16 by 9 though. So that's kind of a downside. Now we have 16 gigs of DDR4 3200 megahertz RAM in both of the units, but the Zephyrus G15 has dual channel. Two 8-gig sticks with one of those 8-gig sticks soldered on, where the Zephyrus G16, you'll see in a second, is a single 16-gig stick soldered on single channel DDR4 3200. So it's the same speed of RAM, but one's dual channel, one is single channel. So that's another important spec difference between these two laptops. Now we've got a 1 terabyte PCIe SSD with an open M.2 slot, Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth 5.1, and you do have upgraded Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.2, I believe, on the Zephyrus G16, so you get slightly upgraded communication module, and they should be very similar in terms of weight, around 4.3 pounds and 0.78 inches thick. Now, the Zephyrus G16, all right, we got an i7-13620H for the processor. This is going to be a 10-core, 16-thread part, and let me just pop over to chat real quick before we continue. Just make sure the chat's working. What's up? Have you seen the Lenovo Lock new lineup? Yes, I have seen it. It looks pretty sweet. I think it's going to be a very interesting laptop to review, which I'm sure I will review in the near future. Okay, so popping back over to the specs, continuing the specs on the Zephyrus G16. $1449 for this laptop. Okay, so it's going to be a lot cheaper, at least compared retail to retail price. But the thing is, the current price is actually only $50 difference between these two laptops, at least when buying them new. Now, the i7-13620H, 10-core, 16-thread part, 16 gigs DDR4, 3200 megahertz, single channel memory. One is soldered, and we have an empty SODIMM slot, so it's easy to upgrade that for dual channel memory. If you want to slap a second 16 gig stick, or 8 or 32 gig stick, if you want to go up to 48 total gigs of RAM. Now, the RTX 4060 can go up to 100 to 120 with a boost, but we typically saw in the 90s for most of the games we played, between like 90 to 95 watts, which is very similar to the Zephyrus G15 RTX 3070 wattage for most of the games. So we'll have to be paying attention to the wattage, but I think in the majority of titles, we're going to see very similar GPU wattage between the RTX 3070 and 4060 in these two laptops. Now, the Full HD 16:10, so Full HD plus 16:10 aspect ratio, 165 hertz display is 284 nits according to the Spider 5 and 94% sRGB. So it's a noticeably less colorful display than the G15 display, and it's lower resolution. But on this smaller display size, it's hard to see a visual difference between a QHD and Full HD display unless you tend to sit closer to your laptop. Now, we have a 512 gig SSD in the Zephyrus G16 with an open M.2 slot, HDMI 2.1, Thunderbolt 4, one USB-C, two USB-A 3.2s. So the nice thing about the Zephyrus G16 is that Thunderbolt 4 support. It gives you some more versatility on your ports. Then you got Ethernet, headphone, micro SD, 90-watt-hour battery. I don't think, is that actually accurate? I think that is accurate. Wi-Fi 6E, Bluetooth 5.2, and then a 1080p webcam with Windows Hello. So that's another nice advantage for the Zephyrus G16. The webcam plus Windows Hello does give it more versatility for usability for like work or communication with your friends. Zephyrus G16 versus 15, key changes: similar chassis, keyboard, touchpad, and ports. Slight difference to the port, Thunderbolt 4 support versus only USB-C. 16:10 aspect ratio on the new G16. Brighter and more vibrant display on the G15 versus Full HD Plus on the G16. Now, the thing is, you can get the G16 with the higher QHD Plus display that's also even brighter and more vibrant than the G15, but you have to pay more money for it. So that's kind of an upgrade. I'm trying to do kind of a price versus price matching, where you get an older GPU with a better display versus a new GPU and slightly worse display. There's a lot of trade-offs right now in the market, and this is a very good example of those kinds of trade-offs. Now, we should have slightly better thermals on the G16 with higher wattages to the CPU and GPU, and then we have Intel versus Ryzen CPUs, and then, of course, we have the huge difference of the Ada architecture on the RTX 4000 series that has 4 nanometers and the 8 nanometer architecture on the 3070. But both of these GPUs have 8 gigs of VRAM, so that's going to be very competitive. Frame generation on the RTX 4000 series is a huge advantage in single-player games, which we will see today. And then you pay $50 more for the RTX 3070 with a better display, at least currently at these prices right now. This 3070 may go on sale, go for even less than what the 4060 version is. It's going to go up and down. Prices, of course, are going to change. There are links in the description down below if you want to potentially pick one of these laptops up. All right, so popping into chat again. Hello, mate. When are you going to review the MSI Pulse 15? It's being shipped to me. It's not arrived yet, but it should arrive probably next week, I think. So it should be very soon. Mohammed says, I just want to know the battery life. Hopefully you'll be able to do the battery life comparison later on. That too, just by using the integrated GPU will help a lot. Yeah, I do plan to do that. Aquilion says, early stream feels good. Do you think the Zephyrus M16 with a 4090 150 watt being thin and stylish worth less performance than most 4090s? It all comes down to price versus performance. The Zephyrus M16 lineup just tends to be a thinner and lighter lineup, giving you slightly less performance, which is a perfect segue today, because I want to talk about that aspect. It's very important to realize that these two laptops, this 3070 and this 4060, both of these are lower power limit GPUs, right? If you were to get a Legion 5 or a thicker Strix laptop, those laptops are going to feature like up to 140 watts of power going through these chips. So if you're gonna like, if you're looking for like a higher power money, more performance for your money, basically, then getting a higher power limit GPU usually will give you more performance for your dollar. But these laptops have made the trade-off of being thinner and lighter, and in some ways more premium with better speaker quality, Windows Hello, especially on the G16. So you have to make your decision whether you would prefer just maximizing your possible performance. In that scenario, you probably want to get a thicker laptop. But today's comparison is comparing two laptop GPUs in essentially the same chassis from the previous generation versus the older generation. So I think this comparison is extremely valid, and a lot of people are going to run into this exact comparison when they're shopping, right? They're going to see thinner RTX 3000 and 4000 series laptops, and that's going to be a very different comparison than a high wattage 3000 versus high wattage 4000 series, right? So, and then in addition, in theory, for $1,500, you could get a 4070 GPU. That's not necessarily, so this isn't necessarily the maximum performance per dollar in the new 4000 series either. Just know that there's a lot of platform differences between these two laptops, and yet they're still priced fairly similarly in the market right now today. So I think this is a very interesting comparison, and I'm hoping that we're going to get a lot of variation. I think the 3070 is going to win in some games. I think the 4060 is going to win in some games, but we'll have to see. So let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, this is going to be a 5-way split screen benchmark comparison. Okay, so we're not talking about just doing a 2-way laptop comparison, even though that's what the title is. You're going to get a lot more performance benchmarks than what the title implies today. So I hope you enjoy that. And we are going to be doing some of the benchmarks just exclusively between these two laptops because I didn't test all of the games. But I've got like 6 or so games at least where we can test and compare a 4050 versus a 4060 versus this 3070. So here we go. It's going to be freaking awesome. So I went over the specs and everything. So if you just missed that, you're just joining us, feel free to drop back to the earlier in the live stream to check that out. Okay. All right. Major differences between the MSI Pulse and MSI Katana series. Different quality display is probably the biggest difference between the Pulse and the Katana. And then the power limits have also been set higher in the Pulse for some reason, even though they seem to have almost the exact same chassis and cooling system. So I don't know, at least according to MSI's spec sheet, the Pulse is supposed to be able to go up to 140 watts, while the Katana only goes up to 105 watts. So very interesting. Yeah, the Lenovo Lux LOQs are available, and I can order one and review it. I will plan on ordering one and reviewing that soon. So, but I've got too many laptops on hand right now anyway, so I'm going to kind of hold off on ordering for a couple of weeks, get all these laptops done and figured out, sold or returned or whatever, and then I'll order a new set of laptops in. Okay, Quillian says, I bet the 4060 will win or tie in all benchmarks. Possibly, because the RTX 3000 series on the 8nm process is not nearly power efficient or as power efficient as the 4000 series. And this is a lower TDP system. So in theory, the RTX 4000 series should get some nice performance advantages because it's on that 4nm process. So we'll see. The MSI Pulse and Katana look kind of ugly. I don't think they look ugly personally. I think they look very gamery, right? They're not like a clean premium looking experience, but plenty of people would be into the design if they're into a gamery type of a design. Mohammed says, when do you get the G14? If you could do the test between 2021 G14 with 3060 and this year's G14 4060, that'd be pretty cool. That would be cool too. Yeah, I agree. That would be a great video. So, but I do plan on doing the G14 as soon as I can. It did release in Canada for order, but not in the United States as far as I know. But I'll order one of those as soon as I can and get that in. All right, so let's start with some benchmarks. So bear with me. We're going to have to get this lined up and everything perfectly. So we're going to start today with just capturing the G15 display for the first 7 or so benchmarks. And then we're going to move to dual capture mode. So we're going to start out with, well, let's start out with doing some Cinebench to get us rocking at the beginning here. So here is, so I've got this G16 right here. I've got the G15 right here. And we're going to position the G15 first. And let's get it propped up just a little bit, like we usually do. All right, and then, so the G15 here, it's been used for a couple years now. And someone kindly let me borrow it for today's video. So shout out to Carla, my girlfriend, for letting me borrow this for today. I've been wanting to do this for a while now. And so here we go. I had to wait till a weekend to do it, though, because she's always using it during the weekday. All right, so we've got a ton of games installed. We're not going to do all of them. We're going to start off with Cinebench, then we're going to move into some game benchmarks. So Cinebench, we're going to do R23. And for fairness sake, let's get HW info open. We'll close Vanguard. Now, I have updated everything on this laptop. Windows updated. And Asus says their BIOS updates through Windows, so it should be up to date as well. And then I've done an NVIDIA GPU update as well. So let's see what this Ryzen 9 5900HS can do. This is an 8-core, 16-thread part. And I'm anticipating some good performance for a thin and light, but I think the G16 is going to actually win this CPU benchmark battle by a fair bit. But we'll see. It is a CPU that's a couple years old versus a recent generation CPU. Though the Intel CPU is more of a budget CPU, so it's not necessarily like the highest end CPU that money can buy. Also, I'm not sure what performance profile set. Let's go ahead and stop this. I'm not sure exactly what performance profile we are set with. I'm going to have to type in the pin a lot because I'm on an alternate Windows user install. So... all right. Why does it keep doing that? Okay. We're going to set priority on the CPU to be above normal. Okay. Beautiful. All right, so we've got process less, so we've got it prioritized on the Cinebench R23 window. We're going to tilt this so the camera can see it a little bit better. All right, let's go ahead and do we're not going to want to do a 10-minute test. We're going to want it to do some basic ones first. And also, I need to open up Armory Crate and set us to our maximum possible performance and all of that. This is the G15, right? Are you doing them one at a time? So that is true. We could do this side by side. That is totally true. Let me pop the G16 out. If we're gonna do one, we might as well do them both at the same time. All right. Hello. Do. Okay. Beautiful. All right, so we're going to set it to manual fan mode with the highest possible performance settings. And just whatever the defaults are in manual fan mode. All right. So, and the important thing to keep in mind for manual fan mode is that the manual fan mode will allow you to control the power limits, but the actual power limits you can set on the G15 versus G16 are quite a bit different now. All right, so And that's a platform difference between the two, and also that the Ryzen chip is actually going to be a little bit different in the sense that the way they calculate the wattage is different. So we're going to set all of our power limits up to the maximum. All right, so here's the power limits on the G15. We're setting it to 45 and 80. We've raised the fan speed to 100%. The GPU, we're going to set up to maximum as well. We're going to hit go. We're going to hit yes. All right. So there we are set up in the G15. All right, and then on the G16, you can see the power limits go all the way up to 110, 135, which is a much higher power limit. But it is Intel tracking the wattage versus AMD, and they don't necessarily measure the wattage exactly the same. So we've applied manual fan mode on this, so we can go ahead and close that down. And we'll open up Cinebench R23 on this laptop as well. I gotta find a good spot for my cup. There we go. That should probably be good. All right, so we've got HW info open on both. And we don't actually have Process Lasso installed on here, which we need to get it installed. If we want the benchmarks to be fair. So I'm just going to plug in my external SSD here and get that installed real quick. Only takes a few seconds to install it, so. Cool beans. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and just start a test and then pop over to here, and we're just gonna make sure that the CPU priority is set to above normal. Cool. All right, so we are ready to do our first runs. I'm gonna set these side by side as I can. All right, and there you go. And let's go ahead and get the HW info open on the Zephyrus G16. All right, beautiful. So you can see that we have 6 P cores and 4 E cores on this CPU, which gives us 10 cores, 16 threads, versus on the where is it? There it is. Core clocks. On the Ryzen 9 5900HS, we have 8 cores, 16 threads. Okay, so we'll go ahead and reset that, and we'll reset this. We'll go ahead and start running Cinebench on both. And you can see that we're doing about 4 gigahertz on the Ryzen chip. Let's scoot this over just a little bit more. There we go. You should be able to see everything now all on one page. So on the left, we have the Zephyrus G15. On the right, we have the Zephyrus G16. And, uh-oh. Sorry, I lost the, I'm going to add some text here so we can tell which laptop's which. For anyone who's hopping into the stream, that way they can see. Okay, so we're going to make this smaller. Alright, I'm going to put this on the bottom. There we go, and I need to add a background blur to that. Alright, so there we go. Alright, so our first score test. You can see the Ryzen got 12,940 versus 16,808. So let's go ahead and do 5 runs in a row, and we'll see. What's up, everyone? I see you guys in the chat. M15 3070 versus M16 4060. Which one's better? That should be all the same as this. This test should have very similar performance between those two. So, does the G16 have expandable NVMe? Yeah, you can upgrade both NVMe slots in both of these laptops. So the 4070 is like 5% better than the 3070 Ti 140 watts. It really depends, Turbo, on which one you're talking about. And yeah, it's going to vary a lot from laptop to laptop. But in general, 13,000 versus 16.7. So we've established that at least in a single run test, we're getting about 3,800 more points on the Zephyrus G16, okay? So, and let's take a look at our temperatures. So we're hitting 96 degrees on the core temps on the G15, and we're hitting 96 degrees in the core temps for the package, at least, on the G16 as well. So they're both pushing maximum temperatures. We're doing 60 watts of CPU power on the G15 versus 95 watts on the G16. Let's do one more test on both of these. So we got 16.4 on the Zephyrus G16. And this test is just taking longer on the G15 because it's scoring less points, so it just takes longer, you know? So we got 12,730 for that round. So the scores go down a little bit as the laptop's thermal throttle. That is normal. And I did recently clean out the fans on the Zephyrus G15 today. At least I vacuum cleaned them. Not detailed cleaning, but they should. I did do some game testing with the G15 a little bit earlier today, and we were still seeing good CPU GPU temps in games, so I'm not too worried. Am I going to review the Samsung Book 3 Ultra? I don't think so, at least right now. Aditya. Arter says, Scar 184090 and Zephyrus Dual 4080, is there a vast difference in FPS? It's going to really depend on the game. But in general, an RTX 4090 this year is going to be about 15-ish% faster than a 4080, at least if it's the same performance TDP. Turbo Man says, do you know what the desktop equivalent is for the laptop 4070 full wattage? It's probably like a 3060 Ti maybe, or a 3070, somewhere in that range. I think it's going to be somewhere in that range at least. All right, so we're going to go to a 10-minute test. Let's do it. 10-minute test. Let's see what we get. And we're going to reset our HW info and see our average temperatures and power limits over the 10-minute time period, as well as clock speeds for a 10-minute time period as well. That doesn't sound too good for a 4070. Yeah, well, you got to keep in mind that the 4070 is really cut down versus the RTX 4080, right? Like the 4070 full wattage is going to get around like 12, 13,000 in Timespy GPU. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little less, depending if you overclock it. And I haven't done enough testing on full wattage RTX 4070s. And I'm not a specialist in desktop. Like, I don't know every single tier in the desktop, but it's going to be in that ballpark. I'm not sure. I have to look up some numbers exactly. It's hard for me to answer that off the top of my head. The Titus says, I have seen some multiple reviewers sending their G16 back because of coil whine or electrical white noise. Have you heard any? Have you had any issues? No, I have not had coil whine issues on the G16 that I know of. But I have not done very much testing on low fan noise profiles. So that's where you're going to really notice that kind of sound. Maybe I can tilt the camera down just a little bit so you can see a little bit more of HW info. Okay, so right now we're doing 3.54 gigahertz on the 8 cores in the Zephyrus G16. Our package power, wow, we've dropped our CPU package power now down to 45 watts of continuous power throughput, which is not nearly as high as what the Intel is doing. Let's take a look at what the Intel is doing. Our CPU package power on the Intel i7 is 102 watts, but it was doing 90, 96. We're averaging 99 watts of power to the G16, and the G15 is only averaging 50 watts of power. So almost literally double the power throughput in CPU-only performance testing. That's a huge difference, at least in terms of raw CPU throughput of electrical power. Now, the Ryzen chip, this one's even still made on a smaller nanometer process than 2 years ago. AMD was still on a smaller nanometer process, so it's still going to be more power efficient on a per watt basis. So it's going to be more competitive than you would think, considering we're only doing 45 watts versus 100 watts of power. You know, look at our clock speeds. 3.54 on our clock speeds. Let's pop up to the clock speeds on the Zephyrus G16. Its process lasso makes HW info a little sluggish in responding. There we go. So we're getting 4.1 gigahertz on 4.18 gigahertz. We've averaged 4.2 gigahertz on the P cores and 3.3 gigahertz on the E cores. So on a fundamental level, when you decide between these two laptops, you really got to think about like the technological advances that we've had in our cooling systems, allowing for CPUs to push higher wattage of performance. Now, again, it's not apples to apples because this is a AMD CPU versus an Intel CPU. What I think really matters is the final numbers here a lot more. If like the Zephyrus G16 is still like 11, 12,000, and then the G16 I'm guessing is going to be around 15, 16,000, then you know the Zephyrus G16 has a clear advantage, but it's not as big of an advantage as what the raw specs look like, and that's simply because AMD jumped the gun a couple years and is running their CPUs at a more efficient process. So. Is a RTX 4070 60 watt enough for AAA games? At 1080p, absolutely it is. At QHD, it's going to be more of a question mark. Some games are going to struggle on ultra settings, but you should be able to get all of the games to work for the most part at QHD resolution, but you're also going to run into VRAM bottlenecks with only 8 gigs of VRAM. So I really wish NVIDIA had pushed 12 gigs of VRAM down the whole stack, and maybe 8 gigs of VRAM on the 4050 only. And then I think the 4080 should have had 16 gigs of VRAM, and maybe the 4090 should have went up to like 24 or something. That would have been awesome. Because if you're trying to push 4K gaming in a laptop, which plenty of laptops are going to try to do that this year, you really want more than 16 gigs of VRAM for a lot of the games today. So, can you add Dota 2 to these benchmarks? I can guarantee you Dota 2 is going to play super well on both of these laptops. But it's too late to add any games to the benchmarks because I've already downloaded all the games we'll be testing today. Artur said, what would you personally prefer, a Scar 18 or a Zephyrus G16? I'm not a fan of the way the Zephyrus Duo has the keyboard scooted forward. I end up typing a lot on my laptop in my lap, and that just doesn't work for me, having the keyboard scooted forward. So I would go with the Scar 18 for that reason alone. Now, if you're okay with the keyboard position, then I would definitely buy the Zephyrus G16 because that has a lot more functionality and way more cool factor, and it's got the Ryzen 9 CPU, and the dual displays just adds a lot more daily functionality, which I love. Which is better, Scar 16 or Scar 18? Is there really much difference in display? Oh, there's a big difference in display quality because you get a 1000 nit display on the Scar 16, or technically 1100 nits. I tested it at 800 nits, but it was still a huge difference in contrast and brightness. So if your goal is to play, if you're like, I think the contrast ratio is probably the most noticeable thing, and then the raw brightness as well. But the contrast ratio in darker games like Dying Light 2 is like, the blacks are really black in Dying Light 2, and I had to adjust the gamma up on my Scar 16 when I was doing some gameplay on it, because the blacks were so black it was like crushing all of the shadows into nothing. So I had to raise the gamma just a hair to make the shadows visible. But it was like a really cool experience to see the blacks go truly black in a mini LED display, where the non-mini LED displays, they just don't have that level of contrast, so darker movies or games, they don't get truly black for the dark areas. Do you think the MSI Pulse 15 4060 140 watt will be better than the Katana 4070? I think it could be. I think it has the potential to outperform it, but the bigger thing about the Pulse 15 is the display, because it's got a QHD, I think 165 hertz, but it's supposed to be really high color gamut. So a 165 hertz QHD display at the same price point with a 4060, I think will be a way better buy than the Katana 15 with the crappy 144 hertz full HD display. That was kind of a bare bones, like entry level display, like what you get in a typical $1,000 laptop. And at $1,500, you really just hope for a better quality display, at least 300 nits, hopefully, and 100% sRGB at $1,500. So that's why I said with the Katana 15, if you want to buy the Katana 15, I really recommend using an external display with it. Otherwise, I recommend probably getting other laptops instead that have better displays. So, Artur says, I heard the Zephyrus Duo secondary screen can be damaged easily, or hinges might get damaged. You could damage the hinges. I'm not sure if they're going to necessarily always be damaged easily, but yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how the durability of those hinges lasts over 10 years, for example. How many of those laptops will still be functioning fully in 10 years? Now, I'm sure that if you don't hit them or artificially damage them, they should last a really long time. But yeah, I think if you're using it all the time, opening and closing it, drinking drinks on it, that kind of stuff. Oh, okay. My mic was on the floor. I forgot I had the floor mic for a little while there. Yeah, if you're doing all those things, you know, I think you're gonna potentially wear out the hinge, or not really wear the hinge out, but like have a chance of dropping something on it or damaging it. I'm sure it can take some knocks before it gets destroyed, but it's far from ideal. Now let's take a look at our average temperatures. We're in the final run. The Zephyrus G15 did 84 degrees and 46 watts on average. With, let's just see the clock speeds. Clock speeds at 3.54. All right, so the Zephyrus G16 averaged 4.19 on the P cores, 3.3 on the E cores. Our core temps were 88 degrees with the core CPU, with the CPU package doing, I believe, 94 degrees. All right, and then our package power still doing 100 watts, but it averaged 95 because it has some lulls in between. Let's go ahead and see what our final scores are. We got 11,829 over here on the Zephyrus G15. And then now we're going to see what we get on the Zephyrus G16 here in a moment. Shaboom, we got 15,988. All right, that's excellent. That does show you that you're getting, you know, about a 33% performance gain overall on the CPU, like 33% faster, at least in multi-core workloads. And this may translate into some gaming performance as well. But the Ryzen chip is also a pretty good CPU for gaming too. So, you know, we'll have to actually see what we get in the end, in the long run. All right. So that's our CPU performance, quick and dirty CPU test. Now let's go ahead and move on to Timespy. And I'm just going to cover this. Huh? Okay. All right. And for this test, we're going to move to our 5-way test comparison. All right. So let me just reposition here. We're going to reposition the cameras for a moment. And this is going to allow us to see the performance of this 3070 versus the 4050 quite a bit easier. All right, so you can see the window here, and we'll grab this. Beautiful. All right, we want to make sure Afterburner. Afterburner is open. And we'll close that. Beautiful. Okay. So I think we'll need to install Timespy. Okay, Timespy is already installed. That's good. All right. And now we're going to need to go to the 5-way. So in the top left, we have the Acer Nitro 5 that costs $1,000. It's got an RTX 4050, and it had it's 105 watt, even though it says 90 watt. We weren't sure what it was. We have the MSI Cyborg 45 watt with RTX 4060. Then the Gigabyte G5 RTX 4060 at 75 watt in the bottom middle. And then we have the Zephyrus G16 up to 120 watt, but typically is 105 watts is the maximum I ever see on the Zephyrus G16. So it's going to be a 5-way comparison today. And it's going to be really interesting to see how this goes. This is going to be the first time doing a 5-way comparison. Now, if there's any members in the chat, I want to point out that there are now some emojis that you can do that are member-only emojis, like boom, hype, celebration, Pepega. These are all emojis that you can use if you're a member on the channel. So pretty sweet. So join down below to become a member if you want to help support me as a content creator, but no pressure as always. All right, so we are loading into Timespy. It's going now on the Zephyrus G16, so G15, I mean. All right, so here we go. This is interesting. Let me get this position correctly if I can, so you can see everything clearly. All right, so this is interesting. This is a real challenge to do. All right, so looking at the G15, let's focus on that for a moment, and then we'll compare. So right now we're doing about 66 FPS walking down this hallway. Our GPU temperature at 62 degrees is still excellent. The Asus CPU paste, I believe, does this have liquid metal on it? I can't remember if it did. But either way, the CPU paste is still holding up really well with both the CPU and GPU temps in the 60s there. The 3080 here, I got to change this. This is not 105 watt. This is 100 watt. All right. So, yeah. So far, I think everything is going really well. Can the Katana 15 with 4070 run with 105 watt? Yeah. So this is super interesting. You can see the Zephyrus G16 and G15 are doing very similar FPS through these same areas, going up the shaft there, doing 50 something, mid 50s. Wow, it's so similar. 65 as we go over the top, 65 as we go over the top for the Zephyrus G16. The performance is so similar between the Zephyrus G16 and the Zephyrus G15 this year. It's incredible, actually, how close neck and neck it is in terms of Timespy performance levels. I think the Zephyrus G16 might just be a little bit ahead right now, but it's not far off, and the temperatures are actually pretty similar. Notice that the Zephyrus G16 doing 105 watts most of the time, but it's occasionally jumping up to 110 or 115 watts. And I only saw 120 watts for like a split second during the whole Timespy. A 2-year-old laptop holding up. That's good. Yeah, that is good. Yeah, I am glad that a 2-year laptop is holding up fairly well right now in this Timespy test. Looks like the CPU test is not going to be quite as high because we're only doing 35, 28, 29 FPS. It's only a few FPS behind, but it's not a huge difference. All right, let's see what our final scores are when we line everything up. I think the 4060 is going to win. Yes, it does. So we got 9,416 on the Zephyrus G15, 8,572 on the CPU score. So the Zephyrus G16 got 10,520, 9,482. So a slight advantage, about a 10% advantage on both the CPU and GPU, at least in Timespy, for the Zephyrus G16. Now, we're going to find out how that translates going into other benchmarks, into all these different games now. So that's going to be, we're going to continue to see some, I think, interesting results. Okay, so let's move on to our next test, which let's find out which one that's going to be. Looks like it's going to be Cyberpunk 2077. All right. So this one's going to be very interesting because all of the other laptops right now have frame gen enabled, And I'm not going to be able to turn frame generation on with the RTX 3070. So we're going to be seeing the performance of frame gen on the other laptops versus no frame gen on this laptop. Now, I will be able to do non-frame gen tests as well between these two laptops, but in terms of what frame gen versus no frame gen on some of these tests, I can't turn off frame gen because these tests were done in the past on these other laptops, right? So I've got to test what I've got, how I've got, and we do have some non-frame gen tests that we'll be comparing against all 5 of these laptops. I believe God of War has no frame gen and no ray tracing in that game. And then let's see here, what else do we have? We have Dead Space, which does not have ray tracing or frame gen. And then we have Hogwarts Legacy, which does have that, and Witcher 3, which does have that. But we also did Witcher 3 on low settings as well. But that had frame gen enabled on there. And then we also did Apex Legends. Oh, that's for the Acer Nitro 5, so we're not going to do that. So, yeah, so we've got some more games that we'll test after those with the Zephyrus G16 and G15. So we're going to be testing this at the same resolution, which is going to be 1080p for this test, which is going to be matching the exact same resolution as these other 5 laptops. We're going to do ray tracing on Ultra with DLSS on Quality. So everything is set correctly, I believe. Let's go ahead and run benchmark. That Acer Nitro 5 is scary strong. Yeah, it's doing pretty good, huh? For a 4050 only. Okay, so we are about ready. We're lined up right at the pool table to activate this. Okay, so here we are, no frame gen on the Zephyrus G15 versus frame generation on all the other laptops. So you can see we're getting 43 FPS on average with 32 for our 1% lows. Yeah. Wow. That's a huge difference in performance using frame gen to boost the smoothness of the gameplay. Like I said, though, that is with frame generation enabled, but that's really what's going to be like, right? When you buy a 3000 series versus 4000 series, you're deciding not to get a laptop with frame generation. So it's important to understand the differences, because certain games like Cyberpunk 2077 that support frame gen are going to have massive performance differences in terms of smoothness and overall performance, right? So you can see that on the 3070 100 watt got 47.6, so basically 48 FPS here, with 28 for our 1% or our min FPS, right? So that's going to be pretty good in terms of playability. You're actually going to be able to play on these settings on the RTX 3070. You could obviously turn these settings way down. We're on RTX Ultra right now, right? You do not have to play the game on ray tracing on Ultra and all Ultra settings, you know. So you could totally still get much more playable frame rates on this 3070 than what we're seeing here. But you can see that on the Zephyrus G16, we got 102 FPS. And then the Gigabyte G5, we got 91 FPS. And the Cyborg, I'm not sure what the Cyborg got. I think it was like 60 or something like that. It's gonna... Yeah, and then the Nitro 5 got 79. So if you are playing a frame generation enabled game, that's going to be the performance difference. Again, that's not going to be the same for every single one. And we're going to be doing some side-by-sides without frame gen as well. So just reminding everyone. And we're about to do one without frame gen. So let's go ahead and move on to that next. All right, so next up is Dead Space. Dead Space, a very CPU demanding game, sometimes can be CPU bottlenecked depending on how powerful the GPU is. So we're just going to get everything set up here. All right, beautiful, beautiful. The Fisherman says, can you test without frame gen? Yes, I can. We're going to be testing some games without frame gen. But we currently do not have Cyberpunk 2077 installed on the Zephyrus G16 anymore, so we have to use these recordings of the benchmarks because I can only install so many games on the Zephyrus G16. So, Fisherman says, oh, wow, I got 9500 with my 2080 Super Max Q 105 watt with an OC. Nice. Have you decided which laptop you're going to keep for yourself? Razer, MSI, Asus. Exonius, I'm keeping the Blade 18 currently, is my plan. For now, unless I change. I hope you guys... Wait, could you guys see all of the data? And during that last test, you might not have been able to see all the data. Well, you can see the CPU, GPU temperature. You couldn't see the GPU wattage. I guess that's fine. That's my fault, but now you can see all of the data for this test. Any Advantage laptops? I have tested the the Asus Strix G15. That might be interesting to do a side-by-side with that at some point. Because right now it's $1,100. That Asus Strix G15 Advantage Edition with a 6800, $1,100 for a QHD display, phenomenal. Really, really great overall deal. Noobda says, I'm thinking of buying the RTX 4060 Asus Scar. Would that be a good option? I believe you mean the Asus Strix G16 or maybe G18. I can get the same price, $1,500 for a 3080 Scar from Micro Center. See, that's the trade-off right there. You go with a Scar, right? If you go with the Scar for $1,500 with a 3080, you're getting more VRAM, so you're going to be more future-proofed in that sense, but you're not going to have frame gen. So it's a trade-off, and I think you're going to have more power in the Scar in terms of raw GPU power, not by a lot, by a little bit, but then the lack of frame gen. So just certain games you're going to get advantages and disadvantages if you went with the Scar versus the RTX 4060, right? So, I mean, if you're a single-player gamer, then you probably want to go with the RTX 4060. If you love multiplayer games primarily, then I would go probably with the 3000 series. It's with a better display too, because the display does make a big difference there, and there is a pretty substantial difference between those two. So right now we're just waiting. Okay, Dead Space is finally loading in. It takes a long time to build all the shaders in Dead Space before you can play the game. Acer says it's the one with the 4050 with 90 watt. Yes, the Acer Nitro 5 is a 105 watt actually. How much faster is the 4060 than a 3060? Is it like 20%? So it's gonna so much depend on what game you're playing, what settings you're playing. You know, there's such huge differences, right? So we're gonna go down to 1080p resolution for this test. We're going to set everything to ultra settings with DLSS on quality. All right, so that means no ray tracing, Nothing. There's just everything else is pretty much standard stock. All right, so we're going to go ahead and play our benchmark, and we've reset our own benchmark numbers. So we are live with our benchmark now with Dead Space. Let's examine our FPS numbers, okay? All right, so starting in the top left, Acer Nitro 5 getting 85, 84 FPS. And that is phenomenal for $1,000. Really, really great performance. The Cyborg 15 with an RTX 4060 45 watt. That thing is kind of struggling a little bit. You can see that it's, you know, you're losing a bit of performance if you go with the Cyborg, because it's only 45 watts on that 4060, and it's only doing 67 FPS. The Gigabyte G5 also not that powerful in a dual load game like this, only doing 68 FPS. So the 3070 handily beats the RTX 4060 and 40 in both the Cyborg 15 and the Gigabyte G5, because this is a very CPU bound game, or a CPU needs a good blend of CPU and GPU power to push higher frame rates, right? And the Zephyrus G16 is doing the highest TDP between both of these laptops, and you can see that it is killing it right now at 86 FPS, which is right now about 6 more FPS than the RTX 3070 variant. So, you know, if you're talking, you know, if you're wanting to get something that is a high amount of power, a high amount of throughput in a reasonable price package, the G16 is a pretty good option, but the Zephyrus G15 also still is a very good option if you're looking for something with a higher quality display, right? Because this has a QHD 165 hertz display, which is a huge, massive difference. Let me go ahead and just back up the video here just a little bit, and let's take a look at our final numbers. And I gotta say, our temperatures on the CPU right now are pretty spicy on this Ryzen 9 5900 at 97 degrees. And looking at our wattage throughputs, you can see that we're doing 80 watts to the GPU, 36 watts to the CPU. And essentially, the way I see it going down right now is we are being CPU bound mainly, but if we had more CPU juice going through this laptop, we would be able to push some higher FPS probably with this 3070. So I think a higher wattage 3070 with a higher wattage CPU combo could definitely probably beat the Zephyrus G16. So it's important to keep that in mind. All right. 79 FPS overall, though, it's quite good. That's quite good in my opinion. All right. Very playable. Good result. Let's move on to God of War next. Okay. Phantom says Nitro has a better screen than the Gigabyte G5. No, the Nitro 5 has an extremely similar display to the Gigabyte G5. They seem to be almost exactly the same. I would also invite you guys to like the live stream. If you guys are enjoying the live stream and you want to see more of it, that's one way you can help support me as a content creator, just by hitting the like button. All right, so here we are. We're building layers right now of performance numbers. 5 levels, split screen, 5 level. I did not think I was ever going to be doing 5 split screen benchmarks at the same time. All right, so we're on ultra settings. Our display is at 1080p, 16:9, DLSS on quality. Loading in right now. When you play on frame gen, how is the display quality compared to no frame gen? That's a great question. I think it's extremely similar and very difficult to tell the difference with frame generation enabled or disabled, unless you're playing certain games that have artifacting or is poorly implemented. But games like Hogwarts, I did a slow motion comparison, Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk 2077, and it was extremely difficult to notice any kind of graphical glitches. The main thing you notice is a slight increase to latency. That's the main downside to frame gen. And then maybe certain HUD elements will be different too. But for the most part, I really like frame gen, and there's no reason why I would turn it off, in my opinion. Now, let's take a look at our performance right now. We're doing 54 FPS on the Zephyrus G15 with an RTX 3070. Notice our wattage pull is about 8890 right now in this very GPU-bound game, with a 99% GPU utilization. So we're really utilizing that RTX 3070 in this test. We are about 10 FPS behind the RTX 4060 120 watt. We are beating, though, two of the RTX 4060s. Let's go back. And I'm going to keep playing this, but I'm just going to rewind it a little bit. All right, so looking at our numbers, we're beating the Gigabyte G5 by 6 FPS by about 10%. The Cyborg we're beating by about 12 FPS. So again, power limits matter a lot still with RTX 4000 series. RTX 4050 though, we're basically matching the 3070 in this is basically matching the RTX 4050 frame for frame right now in this raw rasterization test, which is super interesting because this is a very GPU bound game. And I was not quite expecting that. I was actually expecting the 3070 to handily beat the 4050, but it's not in this game. So that's very interesting to see. Basically identical performance between the 3070 and the 4050. The 4060 is handily beating the 3070 by about 8 FPS or about 14%, 15%. Okay, and that's raw rasterization. That's not including frame gen right now. So let's move on to the next test, Hogwarts Legacy. This one's going to be another frame generation test. And that's going to be interesting. We do have Hogwarts Legacy where we can do some non-frame generation tests as well. So I've got that. I'm able to get that loaded up for our side-by-side here. Let's see if we can get this figured out here. Beautiful. Okay. So again, we're going to have no frame generation on the RTX 3070 with frame generation on the other games, and then we'll test. And then we'll test the non-frame gen. This might kick me out. To be able to do these side by side, I might have to restart Hogwarts here. We will see here shortly. All right, so we're loading in right now. All right, so if I pop this over, you can see our full screenness for a second while we get our settings set up. So DLSS on quality, no frame generation, uncapped FPS. Everything is on ultra with low textures, with ray tracing enabled. Let's go ahead and get loaded in. All right. Now, one thing to point out is that if you only have 6, right now we're in Hogwarts. Let's just run around in Hogwarts for a moment and see what kind of FPS we're getting. It appears to be pretty playable, but a lot of stutters. Wow. Okay, no, down to 25 FPS there. You know, we're fully utilizing all of our RAM. We are wanting the game is wanting to use probably around 24, 25 gigs of RAM right now. So having 16 gigs of RAM is going to be a limitation on all of the laptops that we're testing. And you got to keep in mind, some of these laptops only had 8 gigs of RAM that we were testing, okay? So right now we're doing around 31, 32 FPS, and it's not very smooth either. Our 1% lows are pretty severe. Is Omen 17? I don't know what specs that is, Shin. You have to give me the specs for the CPU, GPU, and display for 1749. Am I going to test the Nitro 4060? I may test it if I have time, but it's going to be a low priority since I already did the 4050 version. Because almost all of the testing will be basically the same, but it's going to be slightly higher performance. So it's not like it's going to be that different. Okay, so here is the RTX 3070. In basically the exact same section. Let's go ahead and play the video. Let's see what we're getting. All right, so right now we're getting 40 to 43 FPS on the 3070. Again, frame generation is enabled on these other laptops where it's not enabled on the 3070. So that's the main difference here. We will do a test with frame generation disabled. But notice how even the 4060 at 45 watts can obliterate a 3070. All right, it's literally obliterating it, in my opinion. In terms of playable frame rates, I would say that a 3070 is going to perform worse than a 4060 in a game like Hogwarts when frame generation is taken into account. If you're not going to take frame generation into account, you're not going to play frame generation games. Let's say you're mainly an esports player, then this benchmark completely does not matter, right? You don't have to worry about frame generation. Don't feel any pressure from the frame generation. But if you mainly play single player games, I think frame generation will be in almost, not all, but the vast majority of new titles in, say, 2024, 2025, in those years. And you're probably planning on keeping a laptop at least for that long, right? So frame generation is not something I think you should ignore if you're a single player gamer mainly. Is DLSS on? Yes, we're on quality right now with DLSS on quality. So right now we're doing 42 FPS with a 3070. That's barely playable, 31 per our 1% lows. The G16 though, doing 90 FPS, 73 for our 1% lows. Gigabyte G5 doing 73 FPS, 48 for our 1% lows. The Cyborg doing 60 FPS, 40 for our 1% lows. And the Acer Nitro 5 at $1,000 with a 4050 is doing 75 FPS with 37 for our 1% lows. So massive difference there between performance on the 3000 versus 4000 series in a frame generation game. We are ready to do our side-by-side with the 3060 with no frame generation. Though 4060 versus 3070 with no frame generation. Let's go ahead and let me get that loaded up. All right, and kaboom, boom. All right, so now we're gonna go here, boom. All right, so we've got the two laptops. I'm gonna get them situated side by side here. I gotta reposition some stuff, including the camera. So just give me a moment. And I'm gonna need to set up a new stream window as well for these side-by-side tests. So that way we get more of a true side-by-side action perspective. All right, and let's just go to map. Hogsmeade. And bingo. All right. Now let me get this set up correctly. Yes. Okay. I think that's going to be about as good as it's going to get. And we'll just do call this split. Hello, hello. We're setting up a new stream window here. Just give me a moment. All right, and then we're gonna add the GH5. Bingo, all right. And we're gonna have to do this one twice. Bingo, all right. And then so we're gonna want to do this for one of them. And this for the other one. I usually try to prep this ahead of time, but I forgot. So it'll just take me a moment. Bingo. Okay, so that should be pretty good for doing our side-by-side. I think that's about halfway between the two. All right, and I just got to put my camera above. There we go. This will put me in the middle for this one. Cool. All right, so beautiful. Okay. Nice. Okay, so let's go ahead and get this set up for the same area again. So I've already changed the settings. They should all already be matching, but I'll double check them here. All right, so if I were to reset our FPS averages now that we're situated in the same spot, we are doing 42 FPS on the G15. And whoa, we went up a little bit. Whoop. Sorry about that. It's gonna be tricky because I gotta not bump the camera here. All right. Beautiful. You know, and the tricky part is we're not loaded into the exact same scene with the exact same time. I should be able to load the game to the exact same game load. That might be an interesting. Let's do Ollivander's Heirloom. Wait, they weren't at the same time. There, 30, 50. I'm trying to find the exact same save. Maybe it's not going to be the exact same. Oh, it's because one has a different time. One has a different timestamp than the other, or time zone. All right. Aquilian says, I'm really looking forward to your Scar 17 review as there's still none of them, or I just look the wrong way. Gotcha. Yeah, there's not very many. Okay, so there, we loaded into the exact same time at the exact same moment. I have not touched the mouse at all. All right, so, all right. So looking at our temperatures, the Intel CPU right now doing a lot more FPS. And so we're doing 47 on average right here versus 37 on average. So about 10 FPS more in this raw rasterization test. Let's also go ahead and do a quick verification of our settings, just to make sure that we're on the same settings. DLSS on quality. Same resolution. This is 16 by 10 aspect ratio resolution. Frame generation is off on both. And popping over to our other settings. We're on all ultra settings with everything enabled except textures on low. Everything's on maximum settings, textures on low, no frame generation enabled. So I just reset our settings again. The camera keeps getting bumped by NPCs walking by. But right now, 46 FPS on the 4060, 38 on the 3070. That's really not an ideal playable range on either laptop, in my opinion. I would definitely want more. So in this scenario, I'd probably try setting the settings down to low, maybe. Or maybe dropping DLSS maybe down to balanced. All right, and then inside the settings, let's just go to a custom preset. Let's go medium settings. All right, we'll apply that, and we'll apply that. Okay, so we're on both on medium settings now. And we are still not doing that great on the FPS. The 4060 did jump up higher at 48 FPS versus 40 right now. You can't really see the FPS numbers very well. I gotta turn the brightness of the Zephyrus G15 down a little bit so you can see the numbers a little bit better. But right now, about 10 more FPS on the 4060. And I think this is because we have ray tracing enabled, and the 4060 is just better at calculating those traces of ray, or the lighting, basically, the light rays. So, because I believe they have better dedicated ray tracing performance, like processors inside the GPU. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're wanting to play with ray tracing enabled, then the performance gap may be pretty large for that reason. Let's try no ray tracing and see if the 3070 can come back and get a win with no ray tracing enabled. So we're going to turn off ray tracing, apply, and we have to restart the game to do this. So we're going to go ahead and go for a restart action. It's going to make me log back in. Because I was doing the game at the same time on the same account. Noobda says, I would play CSGO, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Warzone, Forza 5, Corsa, Minecraft. If you're going to play those games, then I would probably go with a 3080 instead of the 4060. I think you're going to get a little more performance out of that. But, you know, given some of the tests we've had today, the 3070 has not done that well. But this is also, you know, a lower wattage 3070. So it's a very different test than a high watt 3080. So I wanted to do Last of Us today. And we're going to try going offline. Play. All right. See if we can get the game to load on both laptops again. I think the biggest thing is if you're wanting to play at QHD resolution, the 3080 is going to have 16 gigs of VRAM, which is a huge advantage for higher resolution gameplay. And in that sense, you're going to be more future-proofed. But frame generation, right? So you might get, you're probably going to get better 1% lows with the 16 gigs of VRAM in some of the future games. At least if you want to play on textures on Ultra, especially. But when frame generation is enabled in those titles, the 4060 would probably really beat the 3080 pretty handedly. So it really depends. This is like a speed loading test right now. Who can load into Hogwarts faster? The Zephyrus G15 wins, even though I clicked it second, which is kind of interesting. All right, we're loading in. All right, so no ray tracing enabled now. Looking at our performance, no ray tracing. Wow, we're still winning on the Zephyrus G16. You know, this is a very CPU-bound area. I think the CPU performance difference here is going to be very noticeable. You know, but that's a natural part of this test because you're buying a older gen tech with older gen CPU versus a newer gen GPU with a newer gen CPU, and it's part of the package deal, you know. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a run through test. I'm going to reset our FPS counters. Boom, we have reset new numbers, and we're going to try to run. Oops, I ran backwards the wrong way. All right, so we're going to start again. All right, so there we go. We're gonna try to run. I can't turn the mouse character, but we can go through this area and see our performance difference as we're running. Interesting, the 3070 is doing pretty good right now. It's actually competing really well with better 1% lows. I'm gonna go and reposition to face forward. Those 1% lows are very important. Okay, so there's our performance difference right there. We got 68 FPS running through Hogsmeade with 15 for our 1% lows, which is pretty dang low. And then we got 34 for our 1% lows on the Zephyrus G16. That's much better. 68 FPS. I would rather have this type of performance if I was playing the game. That said, let's continue running and seeing what we get. We'll start a new batch, and we'll continue running. And I'm gonna try to make this as fair as I can as we run around the map here. Of course, it's not going to be completely perfect. But at least we'll be in the same area of the game. So again, higher FPS on the 4060. And, you know, our 1% lows may be inherent to the CPU differences too. The Ryzen CPUs in previous tests had better 1% low performance than the Intel, at least in Hogwarts, in my other CPU tests that I did. All right. So our 1% lows are getting a bit better now that we're in an area with a lot less NPCs. I'm going to refresh our number. We basically have similar types of performance on both, but our 1% lows are better. Oh, I can't leave out here. We got to go this way, I guess. We go back towards the city. There we go. Our 1% lows are a lot better outside of Hogsmeade without all the NPCs and extra animations. Super interesting. So definitely the 4060 is pushing higher frames with ray tracing enabled, ray tracing disabled, and obviously with frame generation enabled, much better frames on the 4060 overall. So let's move on to our next game. Which is going to be The Witcher 3. And we've got high settings and low settings for The Witcher 3. I'm going to have to reposition the camera again here. Hold on. Witcher 3. We're a little green. Okay, so we're going to be doing split screen with all 5 laptops again for this test. I'm getting this set up in the right area here. Hold on. Beautiful. We're loading into the game right now. Okay, so we need to make sure we're at 1080p, no frame cap. We cannot turn frame generation on, right? So that's important to recognize that we cannot turn frame generation on. We want full screen. All right, and then for our graphics, we want everything on low to start with DLSS on quality. The game wigging out on me there. So we're on the low preset, DLSS on quality. And we're at, for display, we're at 1080p 16:9 for this test. So the important thing to keep in mind for this one is that we are going to be frame generation enabled on the other laptops. We cannot enable frame generation on the 3070, right? So that's another key difference. All right, so very smooth frame rate so far. Let's go ahead and get set up in the same area. This is all on low, right? VSync off. All right. And graphics low. Yep. Okay, so we're in the same area of the game. We're looking in the exact same place. It looks like a slightly different time of day, but other than that, the test should be very, very fair. So right now, we're getting 118 FPS on average. The RTX 4050 getting 158. The 4060 low watt Cyborg 124. The Gigabyte G5 4060 75 watt 144. Again, keep in mind, frame generation enabled on the 4000 series, no frame gen on the 3000 series. 182 on the Zephyrus G16. Very interesting result. We can do a non-frame gen test on this as well. I'm going to get the Witcher 3 loaded up on the G16, but we're going to keep doing this test. So we're going to switch everything over to high settings now. So again, the 3070 is way behind when factoring in frame gen, but of course that's frame gen. So our settings for this test, next test, is going to be ray tracing on ultra. All right, and then again, no frame gen, but we'll do a frame gen. We'll do a non-frame gen test as well. So everything is on ray tracing ultra now. Display 1080p 16:9 still, and we'll resume. All right, and here we are. So now we're doing 40 FPS versus 60 on the Nitro, 53 on the Cyborg, 59 on the G5, and 77 on the G16. So a 37 FPS gain on the G16 with the frame generation enabled. Wow. That is a huge difference when you turn frame gen on, and it really is a difference in smoothness of gameplay on the same settings, right? Notice our wattage poll. We're doing the same wattage on the RTX 3070 100 watts right here versus 15 watts to the CPU. Wow, the CPU is hardly taking any wattage in this scenario. On the Ryzen, very interesting. All right, so let's go ahead and do a side-by-side now with... Oh, I wasn't in the right mode. Hold on. Let me show you the right mode. For ultra settings, here's the ultra settings. There's the ultra settings for you. So we got 60 on the Nitro, 52 on the Cyborg, 59 on the Gigabyte G5, and 77 on the Zephyrus G16 versus the 3940 FPS of the G15. The G15 is still going to be playable, but it's far from ideal. You know, you really want to get closer to the 60 plus FPS range, which all these other laptops are getting really close to, if not surpassing, right? So that is a huge difference in performance between the 3070 without frame gen versus these other laptops with frame gen. So next we have a test to see what kind of performance you get without frame gen on both laptops. So we're about to do the split screen test again. So let's get the camera set up in the right spot. All right, and we got to change our settings to be the right settings. So we're going to do ray tracing on ultra, DLSS on quality, 1080p, no frame generation, so we're disabling frame gen. Let me grab... this text. and put it in here. So that way you guys have the text as well for which laptop's which. Okay, so the G15 with the 3070 is on the left. The G16 with the 4060 is on the right. And all the settings should be the same except no frame generation, which, you know, if you're doing a side-by-side test in a game like this, you'd obviously be running frame gen. But this is going to help you get a better idea of our performance numbers. For sure. So I'm trying to make this as exactly the same as I can. That looks exactly the same on both screens. Resetting our numbers once again. So 44 FPS versus about 40 FPS. Our 1% lows are basically the same. Our 4060 is only pulling 80 watts in this scenario versus 100 watts on the 3070, because the Ryzen CPU is, I guess, more power efficient in this scenario, because the Intel is pulling 44 watts versus the Ryzen's pulling 15 watts. Very interesting performance difference there, allowing the GPU to boost higher with the Ryzen chip. Our actual temperatures on the GPU is 69 degrees on the G16, though, 68 degrees here, versus 77. 77 for the G15. And then our CPU temps are 80 on the Ryzen and 77 for the Intel. So the Intel's doing a good job cooling itself down, or the Zephyrus is cooling it down really well, even though it's pushing much higher wattage through the CPU. Super interesting. Let's try doing a bit of a run test. Let me try all low settings, though, as well. Rawl says, so the 3070 is almost exactly the same as the 4060. At least at this ballpark, at this level of performance, with no frame generation taken into account, it seems like the 4060 is just a little bit faster. We've seen about 10% approximately. They're so similar, though. There's not a huge performance difference. You know, in a game like this, though, because we're pulling higher wattage through the GPU on the 3070, it's not exactly an apples-to-apples fair comparison, but it is a platform-to-platform difference because the Ryzen is just more power efficient, allowing the GPU to boost a little higher. So I think that's a very important context to keep in mind for this laptop test right now. So I'm going to try to find kind of just I don't know, an area we can run around to. I kind of want to also try this without any ray tracing. All right, so I want to try this on a more realistic frame rate. Let's try like low settings again. Or let's just try ultra with no ray tracing. All right. Because that's probably what a lot of people would want to do. Ultra with no ray tracing. Should be also very realistic. Because then you get high textures, but you don't have the ray tracing, maybe potential advantage for the 4060. All right, so here's some nice FPS numbers for us. So 101, 102. Wow, it's so close in this scenario. I got to move this camera over just a hair, I think. There we go. Now that's like essentially identical images on both. Resetting the FPS count again. Our 1% lows are still better on Ryzen. And we're pulling way less wattage to the CPU on Ryzen too. But it's interesting. It's so interesting. Rawl says, hey, I'm looking to buy a laptop for gaming, work, and school at 1440p. What GPU should I aim for in a laptop? So The biggest difference is between QHD and Full HD is that you probably want more VRAM. So ideally, I would go for a 4080 that has 12 gigs of VRAM if you can. That said, most games will still be playable at QHD if you're willing to turn down textures down to low or medium on those titles. But some games are going to really struggle and chug and have low at 1% lows. And in that scenario, you may actually have to reduce your resolution or set your DLSS down to like balanced or ultra performance or something, right? So there are options if you end up getting VRAM limited in a lot of the modern games, because you can use DLSS to upscale from a lower resolution. So it's going to vary a lot though. The 4070 has 12 gigs of VRAM. No, it only has 8 gigs of VRAM. But that's why I think if you're going to play QHD gaming on a budget, I think going with a 3080 with 16 gigs of VRAM is going to be more future-proof for raw rasterization gameplay, or a 3070 Ti. I'm not sure. Is there any laptop 3070 Ti's? I don't know. The Aorus 17H is a good deal if you want 12 gigs of VRAM, RTX 4080. The Omen 17 also, I think, could be a good deal with 12 gigs of VRAM, RTX 4080. The Strix G18 with a 4080 is also a great deal at 2500. The Alienware M16, if you're willing to deal with software issues, is also a pretty good deal. All right, so there's our performance numbers for The Witcher 3 side by side. Very interesting result. I think the 3070 is far from a bad GPU, but if it's possible to get a 4070 and then have that frame generation boost, it's kind of like, why wouldn't you want to do that? You know? All right, so we're going to try Last of Us. I don't believe all the shaders will be rendered on either of these games, on either laptop. So that's going to be a downside. Loading the shaders takes hours for Last of Us. It's not something that happens quickly. So we'll have to test it as best we can. The 4050 should have had 8 gigs of VRAM. I agree. I think it would have been much better. And I think the 4060 and 4070 should have had 12 gigs. And I think the 4080 should have had 16 gigs, and the 4090 should have had 24 gigs. I mean, let's be real. Let's be real. If you want to play 4K, you're going to really need to have more than 16 gigs if you want ultra textures. So we're loading into Last of Us. First time I've ever benchmarked this game on live on the stream. So this one's going to be very interesting to see. I don't know. I'm just going to start a new game, I think, on both, and we'll see some of the cinematic animations. All right, and we're going to have to probably set... So right now, we are at... right now, it's saying we're passing the VRAM on high settings. On medium settings, it says we're going to be good on VRAM usage. So that's nice. So we'll probably test on medium settings. I feel bad doing medium settings, but that's the realistic nature. I mean, we could try ultra settings to start with. It wants 11 gigs of VRAM right here. That's what it's saying, 11 gigs of VRAM. For the ultra settings on Last of Us at 1080p or 1200p. And then if we were to do ultra settings, and we could just turn textures down probably. So textures we could then set to... There. All right, so... We're setting textures to medium, and then ultra settings, except for textures, is what we're going to have to do in this game. All right, so options, graphics. We're going to do ultra settings, and scroll down. Both of these laptops only having 8 gigs of VRAM. This is the realistic reality of an 8 gig VRAM laptop in 2023, and it's only going to get worse as the years go on, right? So it's so important to recognize that this is the case, and to be realistic about it. It sucks that is the case, but that's the case. You know, it's what we can do. We got to do what we can do with what we got. You know. All right, so if I do a new game. Cool. All right. So this is tested. They were testing this test at 1200p, so 1920 by 1200. I'm going to add the GPU names there on the bottom. Sniper Hawk says, might as well get a 3080 Ti. Well, I would say a 3080 is going to be more in your price range, because you can get a 3080 for 1500, right? So a 3080 for 1500 could be more attractive from a VRAM perspective. 16 gigs of VRAM should be plenty for at least 4 years. Yes, as long as you're playing a QHD or 1080p. But even right now, 16 gigs of VRAM is not enough at 4K. If you're going to try doing ultra textures in games like Hogwarts or this game, probably. I'm not sure about 4K on tech. I think you might be okay with 16 gigs of VRAM, I think. The Aorus 17H, I got the 17H and I love it. Nice. So NVIDIA is selling dead on arrival laptops. Yeah, the 8 gigs of VRAM. So the thing is, like, it's not dead on arrival. It's you have to reduce the settings on a brand new laptop. At least if you're getting, you know, not a high-end one. If you're getting a high-end 4080 or 4090, you don't have to reduce the settings. If you're getting more of a budget mid-range, then you have to reduce the settings. And that's where, like, I think going for RTX 3070 Ti or 3080, at least the RTX 3080, 3080 and 3080 Ti with 16 gigs of VRAM, they become really attractive when they're on sale for $1,500. Because you're getting that VRAM boost with a lot of raw rasterization power. You just don't get frame gen. Systems reality. You got to be realistic though, that like some people are not going to be able to get that deal that you got on the 17H, because, you know, it's going to vary a lot. Okay, so I'm going to pause this until we're loaded in on both laptops. Hopefully we don't have any crashes. Being realistic though. Yeah. Okay, so we're about ready. Here we are, Last of Us benchmark, RTX 3070 versus RTX 4060. Let's see what we get. Notice that we're maxing the RAM on both of these systems, 16 gigs being maxed. And again, we've got to remember that we have single channel RAM on one laptop and dual channel on the other laptop. All right. So I just paused it for a little bit on the right to make sure they line up properly. Wow, the FPS is so similar. 61 FPS average on both machines. Intel with a higher 1% lows for the first time today that we've seen. Our CPU temps are better on the Ryzen this round. Way less wattage going through the Ryzen. 50, 30, 40 less watts going through the Ryzen chip. But Intel with slightly better performance, at least in 1% lows. Notice that our 3070 is able to boost higher at 93 watts of power. That's a pretty big difference, right? Being able to boost your GPU wattage to a higher level. It's going to make a big difference. Our memory utilization on the 4060 is a bit higher at 7.1 gigs versus the 3070 doing 6.6 gigs, which is interesting. It makes me question if I have the exact same settings being ran, but as far as I know, they are. I just refreshed the benchmark counter again. And so our average is actually going up a little bit. It's interesting. So the 4060, even though it's at less wattage right now, even though the 4060 is at less wattage, we're still pushing a higher frame rate on the 4060. At like 15 or so less watts to the GPU, which I was not expecting that. So again, about 4 more FPS on the 4060 than the 3070. Very interesting result. I was not expecting it to be so close, honestly. I mean, I knew they would be kind of close, but it's very, very close. All right, so now we're in the game. I could actually move around a little bit. So, Bingo Bongo, that's a good example of Last of Us, I think. So let's go ahead and exit that. Let's see here. Oh, we've got Dying Light 2 next. From one zombie game to the next. Let's go. The 4060 kind of hot, is it? I didn't really notice. Let's see. Yeah, in that game, we were doing 77. Well, it's under 80. I wouldn't call that hot. As long as it's staying under 80, well away from thermal throttling, then that's still really good. Yeah, so I wouldn't worry about that. That's fine. Okay, so we'll start off with frame gen enabled on the 4060. Like the way that, you know, a typical player is going to actually run the game and play the game, and then we'll do no frame gen. All right, so high quality ray tracing, full screen. We'll go to 1280p. All right. Frame generation is enabled. DLSS is on quality. All right, and we're going to save that on both. And we're going to go to benchmark on both. Here we go. Mitchell says, would you buy an open box Alienware X17 with a 3070, not a TI, an 11800H for $700? I mean, that's obviously a good buy. You could just turn it around and resell that for probably $1,300, probably $1,200 at least. All right, so I'm going to reset our FPS counters. Our FPS counters are the ones that we'll be looking at. Yeah, I want to make sure. I don't think we have VSync on, so yeah, we should be good. So yeah, frame generation really pushing much higher frames so far in this game. 87 on the Zephyrus G16 with a 4060. 55 FPS for the 3070. Obviously extremely playable on both systems with and without frame gen. We're going to do a non-frame gen test here in a moment. But this is just to give you a good idea of the kind of performance difference you can expect with the way each of these laptops are designed to be ran, right? My OS 17X 4090 crashes after 10 minutes every time I boot it up. Interesting, Massis. Why would it test 10 minutes? Is that with or without a load? I'm curious. Samuel says, should I push my 1.1K budget for a G5 to the 1.5K for the Zephyrus or downgrade and go for a good 4050? I do think that it's better to get a 4060 with 8 gigs of VRAM for 1080p gaming. The 8 gigs of VRAM will be noticeable and worthwhile upgrade that you'll see the benefits of as the years go on more and more. So I would recommend a 4060 over a 4050 if you have the money. If you're on a tight locked budget, it's not like it would be terrible on either one though. Okay, so we ended up with 91 FPS and 59 FPS. So we got about a 50% performance gain on the RTX 30 versus the RTX 3070, the 4060 being about 50% faster. Now, let's go ahead and do a non-frame generation test with the exact same settings. Frame generation is off now. We'll save that. And here comes a apples to apples comparison with ray tracing and DLSS on quality. All right, so did it not save? We're getting way more FPS. We're getting way more FPS still on the 4060. I don't think that can be right. So maybe it didn't save my frame generation disabling. So let's try that again. Yeah, it says frame generation is still on. Now frame generation is turned off. Okay. All right, high quality ray tracing on both are enabled. Let's go ahead and benchmark again. Do you have any plan to review the Lenovo Pro 7i with the 4080 or 4090? Yes, I do. I just need to, I have an order in for it. It was delayed, and then now I need some more funds to be able to buy more laptops. And I do want to do a Lenovo lock review as well. So, weird. It's so weird. Our FPS is still super high on the RTX 4060. It's much higher than the 3070 Ti. Why? It must not have disabled frame gen. Maybe we need to like restart the game or something. I guarantee you I disabled it both times and I think it just didn't go. Which laptop should I get? Going for around $1,500. That is a great question. Do you want to go for the maximum GPU performance, or do you want to go for a nice blend of like QHD display and all of that? You know, because that's kind of like the biggest question in my mind. I should make a video on that topic. I haven't decided exactly which one I'd recommend yet. But I think the Zephyrus G15 is a great option. See, frame generation is still on. I've hit saved. Yes. It says it's off. Let me restart the game and see if it'll save my settings now. I don't know why it's not saving my frame generation disabling right now. So what am I trying to say? In the $1,500 range, $1,500, I would probably go with the Scar 15 RTX 3080 if you want a high quality display and high levels of raw rasterization performance. That's a steal of a deal at $1,500, brand new. That said, I have a link to that on my top deals right now. The other option you could go for at $1,500 would be going for an RTX 4000 or maybe a 3070 Ti. So for the 4000 series, you could either go for a 4060 or a 4070. And those are going to be, if you go for a 4070, you're going to have to get a crappier display quality. All right. Frame generation says it's off now. Let's go ahead and try benchmarking again now. Super weird. Anyway, so if you're at $1,500, you can either go for a 3070 Ti, RTX 3080. 3080 has the most VRAM. Or you can go for a 4060 or 4070. If you go for a 4060, you're going to get a crappier display quality. If you go for a 4070, you get a crappier display quality. 4060 at $1,500, you can get a nice QHD display. So there's a lot of trade-offs. I think right now for $1,500, I would probably end up buying the MSI Pulse 15, and if it sucks, I would return it. Looks like we're actually getting fair benchmark numbers for once. This is good. This is very good. All right. So right now we're doing about three or so more FPS than the RTX 3070. The 4060 is slightly outperforming right now. But we'll see as we go along here. For $1,500, Massa says he'd get a secondhand Legion 7 last gen. That's another great option. Like I'm selling my RTX 3080, Scar 15, and Legion 7i 3080, and both of those are very high-end machines with great displays. So, does frame generation have noticeable quality difference based on my tests? I cannot tell that frame generation is enabled visually, except that it's a smoother experience. For the most part. There's a few things in certain games that you're going to be able to tell. Like the HUD elements, or maybe certain fabric maybe, that don't auto-generate as well with the AI frames. But... and then the other thing with the visual experience is that it slightly increases latency. So, but in a single player game, I would take the increased smoothness because it's like a huge gain in smoothness with frame gen, with the slight increase to latency. It might be like 20% worse latency, but in a single player game, that doesn't matter, right? So we ended up with 60 FPS over here on our average, and I accidentally pressed the wrong button. For at the end there to end it. So I'm gonna have to go in here and just see on the live stream what it was right as it ended. Looks like it was 59 FPS right as it ended. So we ended up with essentially the same performance. Right as we ended, 60 FPS. So 60 FPS in both the RTX 3070 and 4060. Basically identical performance on both of these machines. Pretty insane. All right, next up we have Control. As long as it works on both machines, I think it will. And this will be another raw rasterization test, or at least a no frame generation test. I think we'll do DLSS on quality and yeah. Which side is the 4060, left or right? You can see on the bottom of the screen, the 4060 is on the right side. And the fact that you have to ask that shows how close these GPUs are. It's so dang close. It's unbelievable. Yeah, so in terms of like, would I Would I buy a more powerful raw rasterization RTX 3080 Ti, or maybe like a lower power 4070? You know, like assuming everything else is identical. If I'm mainly playing single player games, I'm going to get the RTX 4000 series because of frame gen. Because I think my prediction right now is frame gen is going to be a huge difference in the future for single player games. You don't use frame gen in multiplayer games. If you mainly play multiplayer games, then get a better display and get a more powerful CPU. And get a GPU with more VRAM too, because that's also awesome. All right, so right now we are doing 1080p full screen, DLSS checked on both, and for our quality preset, we're going to do high on both. And we're going to do ray tracing on high on both. So basically maximum settings, 1080p. All right. I think we're going to do 1200p for our resolution. All right. 16 by 10. Beautiful. All right. That all looks gorgeous. We'll do continue game on both. Okay. Don says, is there any MSI stealth unboxing soon? Not yet, but I do hope to do it probably within the next month. It was my time frame. But yeah, that's like, it's not that I don't want to do it. It's that it's just a matter of making it happen, I guess, you know, and getting it in. I'm hoping MSI will send me one for free instead of me having to buy it, because it's a lot of hassle having to buy them and then resell them and deal with all of that. I just joined. Is it a 3070 or 3070 Ti? It's a 3070. Okay, so right now we are doing 77 FPS on the 3070, 82 FPS on the 4060. So higher FPS once again on the 4060, and the Ryzen chip is just sipping the wattage at 16 watts, 56 watts right now, 44 watts on that i7 Intel chip. The Intel chip is just taking way more juice to run some of these games. And looking at our GPU temps, we're at 68 degrees on the 4060, 70 degrees on the 3070, and we're at 100% GPU utilization on both of the systems right now. So that's all very good. And our temps on both systems are very good overall. They're very similar temps, GPU utilization, really showing that it's such a similar platform and performance level in raw rasterization performance between these two systems. Julius with the €12. Thanks so much for the super chat, dude. I appreciate it. He says, could you let us know or make a video about your best test benchmark loop to verify a CPU undervolting, GPU overclocking setup for 100% stability? Thanks. That's a good question. For me, it's probably the most demanding undervolting applications I've seen is like AV video workloads. So things like Handbrake, Adobe Premiere, Photoshop, and DaVinci Resolve are the most demanding and most likely to bust your undervolt. Gameplay typically does not bust your undervolt. Like you're usually going to find instability in those audio video rendering workloads far before you run it into it in the gameplay. All right, so let's try doing some running around, at least a little bit here. And I'm going to refresh our benchmarks so we have some new numbers that are running around numbers. Hey, I'm doing a good job, right? Running 2 games at once. It's so hard to do. I'm just controlling with gamepad too, touchpad. So the 4060 right now is really, it's beating the 3070 in this test. 77 FPS and 83 FPS, at least in this raw rasterization test, even though the 3070 right now has higher levels of wattage. So 98 watts going through the 3070, only 80 watts going through the 4060, and the 4060 is still winning, interestingly enough. Julia says, thanks for the response. Yeah, no problem, man. No problemo. Now, another good, maybe if you want some games to test for your undervolt, probably you want to do CPU demanding games like, you know, Hogwarts, Dead Space, but maybe even multi-cores demanding games like Battlefield 5. That's a very multi-core CPU demanding game. So, yeah. All right. So, Sujith Petty says, what is the best gaming laptop to buy with a price range of $2,500? So that's a good question. I would say the best $2,500 gaming laptop right now is probably the Strix G18, Omen 17. And if you go a little bit higher on the budget, maybe the Legion Pro 7i with a 4080, because that's a little higher though. If you can go higher though, then I would say going with the Omen 17 4090 for under 3,000 is if you can go a little higher. Because you can get the 4090 for $2,749 in the Omen 17 if you get the right component combinations. All right, so there's your control benchmark. And we also have Shadow of the Tomb Raider next. You could go previous gen, like an RTX 3080 Ti, like Razer Blade 17 or something in that range, maybe if you buy it used. The thing is, the 4080 and 4090 crush the 3080 Ti in terms of performance. So it's just like right now, I can't really recommend a 3070 Ti or a 3080 Ti unless they're really on sale and they're priced way down to be competitive, right? So that's kind of like I'm in an odd position as a reviewer with the 3080 Ti. Because those are still priced too high. Most of the 3080 Ti's are still over $2,000, and it makes them unrecommendable, at least in the short term, until the prices come way down. A 3080 Ti should probably be around like $1,800 to $2,000 to buy competitively, because there's such a performance gap between a 3080 Ti and a 4080. And if a 4080 can be had for $2,400 in the Omen 17, then yeah, it makes it very hard to recommend them. I tried 2 Zephyrus units and kept having display defects. Got them from Best Buy. Bought the Legion 5 Pro instead. That's too bad, Orlando. I haven't had any display defects on any of the Zephyrus laptops I bought, so I think you got really unlucky. Okay, so I think we're good to go. We have highest settings on both systems, ray tracing enabled, and I believe DLSS is on quality. Yes. Yep. DLSS on quality, ray tracing enabled, ultra settings. We're at 1920 by 1200 resolution. So let's go ahead and see what we get. Raul Kaplan says the Strix G16 at 1400 was a great deal, and then they raised it to 1700. No, you can still get the Strix G16 with a 4060. You can still get that. Don't worry. It's unfortunate that our laptop on the right, the G16, loaded quite a bit faster. Whoa, this is a big performance difference, at least initially. Interesting. Okay, so we're rounding out now to about a 15 FPS gain on the 4060. I was not anticipating that we would have that big of an FPS gain on the 4060 in this test. Pretty interesting. Yeah. Yeah, the Strix, I think the Strix G16 is also a really good option at under $1,500, but it just doesn't have a QHD display. It's just full HD. That's the main downside to it. But it's still a really good option. Yeah, the 4060 is winning big in this test, which I was not anticipating. I thought that I would think that this one would actually do pretty well with the 3070. You know, the 3070 in almost all of these games has been doing 100 watts versus only about 80 watts on the Strix G16 4060. And yet the 4060 is still winning almost all of the raw rasterization tests, which is surprising. Suji says, would you recommend an Alienware M16 for the price range of $2,500? Well, the M16 costs $2,600, and it does come with some nice premium features over the Strix G18, like advanced Optim. Sorry, they both have advanced Optimus, but the Alienware has Windows Hello, but it doesn't have as bright of a display. And the bad thing about the M16 is that the software is terrible. At least so far, I have yet to see it be better on the control software. It just doesn't work very well. It's hard to update. It's hard to control your stuff, like your fan profiles and everything. So in general, I would only recommend the Alienware M16 if you're willing to deal with software jankiness. Poison Milk Bob says, how is this generation's Lenovo Legion Pro 5i, or should I wait for the AMD version to release? I have not tested the Legion Pro 5i. It's going to be on the to-do list to test for later this year. So we'll have to see how it does. But I anticipate it's going to be good. It's going to be a good laptop. I'm not thinking it's going to be bad or anything. Benson says, so if you want 4K gaming, would you suggest a 4090 laptop, or should I go for a SFF PC? I'm guessing you mean self-building the PC. I think a 4090 laptop will do most 4K gaming just fine. You're just going to run into VRAM limitations. You know. Okay, so I'm going to scoot the camera over a little bit. You can see we got 97 FPS on the 4060, 85 FPS on the 3070 Ti. Very good performance on the 4060. That is the biggest gap we have seen so far for a non-frame generation game. That is, of course, about a 14% performance gap. So there's an advantage to the 4060 in this game, even though it was running at 80 watts versus 100 watts on the 3070. Small form factor. Okay, SFF is small form factor. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, if you're gonna try to go for a small form factor PC, then dude, just get a laptop. Definitely. I would think the laptop's gonna be the better choice, because if you're gonna go with a desktop, you could go like the biggest gain in performance going with the desktop is going to be going with the 4090 desktop card. You could get a 4090 desktop build for the same price as a 4090 laptop price, you know, or at least pretty competitively done. So that's why I'm thinking, you know, if you're going to go with a desktop, your laptop 4090 is going to be very similar in performance to your desktop 4080, or a little bit under it, right? A 4070 Ti, basically desktop card for that RTX 4090 laptop. And a laptop is going to be so much more portable than a small form factor desktop, right? So yeah, unless you're going to go with like a Radeon card or something for the desktop with like a high amount of VRAM. I don't know. I guess I'd have to see what your actual small form factor desktop would be. But yeah. Blonde Girl says, in Canada, Zephyrus G15 3070 Ti still costs 3,000 Canadian. Why in the US is it so cheap? I don't know. I don't know. It's interesting. All right. One thing is important is the GPU bound percentage. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Let me review that real quick. Let me take a look at the benchmark as it's going through. I think we could be seeing some like CPU bounding issues potentially. GPU utilization is 99% on the 3070 and only 94% on the 4060. So if we're being CPU bound, we're being CPU bound on the Intel mainly, which is kind of the opposite of what I was thinking it was going to be. I thought we would be, I was thinking we were going to be more CPU bound on the Ryzen, but we're not. Okay. Huh. Interesting. Okay, so it's time for the summary wrap up of everything we've found out. Which of these systems would I recommend for you to buy if you have $1,500? All right, so let me switch sides. There we go. I'm trying to hold both these laptops at once. It's a little tricky to do. Okay. Kaboom. All right. So in terms of raw rasterization performance and frame generation being taken into account, which of these two laptops, if you have $1,500, would I recommend? Okay. Oh, and you can extrapolate this out to the other laptops in the market segment. But you got to keep in mind, there's a lot of variations between the different laptops, right? So it's not going to be a perfect one-to-one apples comparison, all right? All right. So the key thing to keep in mind when evaluating these benchmarks is that both of these GPUs in these laptops are in like the 80 to 100 watt range in most of the games that they're playing. If you have a higher TDP laptop, then I think a 3070 is going to perform a bit better when you can go up to like 130 watts of power versus an RTX 4060 going up to like say 140 watts of power. The 3070 is going to get a little bit more of an edge from that increased power limit. So if you're dealing with a laptop, like if you're going to buy a thicker laptop, then just know that the 3070 is probably going to get a little bit more boost from the extra juice. I'm guessing about a 5% performance boost, which would bring it a little bit more in line with the performance we saw from the 4060. Now, in most of the games we tested today, in the frame generation enabled games, we saw anywhere from 50 to 100% performance gains on the 4060 with frame generation enabled. Now, when we turned off frame generation, we saw the 4060 beat the 3070 in every single game we tested, without exception, except a couple of the games we tied, where it was within like 1 or 2 FPS of the laptops being together. So Dying Light 2 was basically a tie right at 60 FPS, like 59, 60. And what other game was a tie? I think there was like The Witcher 3 was almost exactly the same as well. So, you know, your performance in non-frame generation games will basically be almost identical. You have the same VRAM between these two, and yeah, so it's going to be so similar between a 3070 and a 4060. Now, of course, the biggest difference between these laptops, realistically, is that the display is better quality on the 3070 variant because it's a QHD display and it's a higher color gamut display and it's slightly brighter as well. So if you're after a laptop that is brighter and has more color gamut, then sacrificing the GPU for a better display is, I think, a viable option, especially if you mainly play multiplayer games. Now, if you mainly play single player games, then going with the 4060 option is, I think, the no-brainer. Like, if you mainly play single player games, I think there will be more and more games where frame generation is going to be enabled, and you're going to have 50 to 100% more FPS in those frame generation games as the years go on. And that is not going to change. Like, this laptop, as far as I know, it's not going to change. Maybe NVIDIA is going to come out of nowhere and they're going to be like, oh, frame generation can now be used on all NVIDIA GPUs. Though, to the best of my knowledge, it's something that is specific to the hardware in the RTX 4000 series, as that's what NVIDIA claims. And I don't have the technical knowledge. And so far, we have not seen anyone break open the BIOS and allow it to be enabled on RTX 3000 series. There was a rumor that you could, but it was never verified and proven that you could use frame generation on older generation GPUs. Now, there are other differences between these laptops that you've got to keep in mind as well, okay? We did not get to test Warzone 2. I wanted to test it today. I installed it on both laptops, but unfortunately, you have to have a mobile number, so I wasn't able to test it. But basically, in games like Warzone 2, where they're very CPU limited and CPU bound, you're going to get a lot more performance on the newer CPUs, because CPU bound games, they're just going to get big gains with the new CPUs compared to the older CPUs, like in this 2021 Zephyrus laptop, right? So you might, I'm guessing, if I were to guess, you're probably going to get a big difference in performance with the RTX 4060 with the i7 CPU. Now, I haven't actually done the test, but that's my current prediction. So just know that there are other advantages and design differences besides just the raw GPU performance and the display, because a lot of the newer laptops this year almost all have Windows Hello, not all of them, but most of them have Windows Hello and 16:10 aspect ratio displays as well. So if you do decide to go with a new 4060 laptop, you may get some design upgrades and feature upgrades, like the webcam. Like this Zephyrus G15, it's a nice gaming laptop. It'll play just about any game on the market on ultra settings at QHD resolution, right? Like it's a very good laptop. But certain games you are going to have to turn the settings down, including the textures, especially if you don't want it to stutter, like in games like Hogwarts. But the big but there is that you don't have the webcam, you don't have 16:10 aspect ratio, and you don't have frame generation. And this laptop, the new version of the Zephyrus G16, it has all of those things. And therefore, it's, to me, more recommendable to more people. Because especially at this 15 or 16-inch display size, the increased resolution from Full HD to QHD is not going to be quite as noticeable as it is on larger screen devices. Like when the laptops go up to 18 inches, it becomes a bigger deal, I think, going to the QHD resolution, because you're going to be able to visually see that difference and finer detail just sitting at your regular viewing distance. Now, if you're someone who sits close to your laptop display, then you can still see the difference even at a 16-inch resolution. Or if you have just really good eyesight, maybe you'll be able to see the difference. But in moving gameplay images, it's extremely difficult to spot the difference in your typical gameplay, jumping from 1080p up to QHD at a 15-inch chassis size. So in general, which of these two laptops would I recommend? I would definitely recommend the Zephyrus G16 for most people, for more future proofing, because of the webcam, because of Windows Hello. There's just a lot of advantages there. Now, with the older Ryzen chip, you're going to get better battery life actually on this older laptop, which is a bit weird to say. So if you're looking for better battery life, I think the older one would actually give you a little bit better juice for longevity. Steve says, who thought no webcam was a good idea? Yeah, that is totally true. What the heck was Asus thinking when they took the webcam off of these laptops in 2021? It was a bad decision. Yeah, so there's my comparison between RTX 3070 Zephyrus G15 versus the Zephyrus G16 with the RTX 4080. If it was my money, I would buy the new G16 with the 4060. I meant 4060, not 4080 a second ago. Because of the frame generation and because of the webcam, Windows Hello, and 16:10 aspect ratio of the display. I think all of those things give it the advantage, the edge that it needs to be a better buy. Plus, Thunderbolt 4 support for ports is also a noticeable difference if you're wanting to do an eGPU down the line or use Thunderbolt 4 connectors. Those also can make a difference. Now, before we end the live stream, we are going to do some Q&A with the chat. So I'm going to put the laptops down for a moment, and let's see if you guys have any questions, and then we'll go from there, okay? Yeah, as you can see, these laptops are like identical in terms of chassis size. Maybe the new G16 is just a hair thicker. It's hard to tell visually that it's thicker, though. But it appears like it might be just a hair thicker. Okay. All right, Johan Yanawat. So he's just going to hold them throughout. No, I just did a bunch of benchmarks. If you just got on the live stream, I could see how that would be confusing, though. Will I be reviewing the Legion 5 Pro? I'm going to review all of the gaming laptops I can get my hands on this year. My goal is to do like 2 or 3 live streams a week and just keep pumping out these reviews. So it's just a matter of getting the laptops in hand, though. So. One guy, 2 laptops. That's right. Raul Kepelen says, no, I'm looking at the Strix G16 north of the Zephyrus. Yeah, the Strix G16 with a 4060, 4070 are great options. 4080 even would be a great option whenever that becomes available. Orlando says, I see that someone was able to get DLSS 3 to work on previous RTX cards. Orlando, I would verify that information because when I Googled it, it looked like it was just someone making up BS and that there was no proof that it was able to work. So if you find proof that someone's able to get it to work, it'd be very easy for them to prove it that it's working. So as far as I know, NVIDIA says that it's a hardware functionality difference between RTX 4000 and that the 3000 is just incapable, physically incapable of running frame generation because it doesn't have the hardware needed to power the frame generation AI component, but we'll see. When someone mentioned it in chat a few weeks ago, I did do some investigation and I was not able to see any proof that it would work on 3000 series. Johan says, wait, does everyone just use those IKEA tables and like IKEA drawers? I'm very confused. I like it. It's very functional. It's a good desk and it's one of the cheaper ones that you can get. I did get the desk and the entertainment system right here from IKEA, and it does work very well. The Alex drawers are a must-have. Yeah, I can really store a lot of stuff in them. It's really great. I like it. Okay, so it looks like chat doesn't have any other questions for right now, but I hope you guys found this super helpful and useful for figuring out what gaming laptop you want to buy in the future. My goal is to make my channel as helpful to you as possible. So if you enjoy content that can help you decide, make your tech decisions easier, please consider subscribing, liking this live stream, and hit that notification bell so you can come and join on the next live stream that I do in the near future. Etanine says, very useful. Thanks, B. No problem. I hope I didn't mess up your name. I probably messed up your name. Sorry. Raul says, do you think the Strix G16 4070 for 2000 with the 13980 HX is good for 1080p and 1440p? So it's going to do 1440p pretty well. You're just going to have to turn textures down. It's not going to be very future-proof from a VRAM perspective at QHD, but it's going to put out good frame rates for QHD gaming for the majority of games out there. And 1080p, it's obviously going to be excellent. And the CPU performance for $2,000 is next level. That's really good CPU performance for $2,000 for the Strix G16. Fares Ben Miled says, is 4070 worth the $300 increase since it is the same VRAM with the 4060? So the 4070, I think, is around a $200 to $300 upgrade in value from a 4060. It's not a huge upgrade in value. Ideally, it'd probably be like a $200 upgrade or less. $300 upgrade is kind of a little steeper If you're not getting extra RAM, SSD space, or better display for 300, then it's probably maybe it's not worth the upgrade. I don't know. It depends. Maybe you might have also like some 4070s also have better CPUs. So you got to look at all of the specs and see what's different when you're comparing a $300 upgrade, because it might be more than just RTX 4060 to 4070. Orlando Diaz says, do you like more laptops or desktops? I just wish the laptop didn't have room anymore. I love laptops because of the portable freedom it gives you to do like everything you want to do on the go anywhere you are at all times. And I tend to travel a lot, and I love having that functionality. Or you can move it from room to room. And it's as long as you can play the games you want to play at the frame rates you want to play. It doesn't matter if you have a desktop or a laptop powering it, right? So, and laptops are phenomenally powerful these days. So yeah. Abadas says, any idea when the G14 review will be out? I think it's on pre-order in Europe. Yeah, it's not for sale in the United States yet, as far as I know. I'm guessing it'll probably be sometime before the end of April before I get to it. So yeah, I'm assuming before May I should have a G14 review. We'll see though. Johan says, is an RTX 3070 8 gig or 12 gig good enough as compared to at least the RTX 4060? Because it works as well as possible in the majority of games. Is it just a doubt between the newer one, having the newer one or older one? If you already have an RTX 3070, there's not much point in upgrading to a 4060 at this time, right? Unless the only exception is if you really want to play frame generation games like Hogwarts, right? Because there is huge gains to be had with frame generation between a 3070 and a 4060. You know, we were seeing like 40 FPS, 45 FPS on the 3070, and we were seeing like 90 FPS on the 4060 in Hogsmeade. Right, looking at the same bridge area of the game. So with frame generation enabled, it's a huge difference in performance. And it really is visually very hard to tell. And it's much smoother. The gameplay is much smoother. But there's not tons and tons of frame generation games out there, but there's a lot of high-end games. Like a lot of the most popular, most desirable to play games, like Cyberpunk 2077, The Witcher 3, Hogwarts, all of those support frame gen. So if you're the kind of player that wants to play that type of game, a lot of those games are going to support frame gen in the future too. So yeah, and is it worth upgrading to from the 3070 to the 4060? Not hugely so, but it is a performance gain to be had. Frame generation is big. But it's really up to you whether you think it's worth it. I'm not going to sit here and say you should upgrade from a 3070 to 4060 because a 3070 is already pushing good frames in the majority of games to be able to have enjoyable gameplay, right? So that's the key. If you can play the games you want to play, that's very good. That's really so much. That's really all you can really ask from your laptop. If you're playing the game you want to play at an enjoyable frame rate, what's to really complain about? There's no reason to be greedy and necessarily have to throw your money around unless you got extra money to spare. If you're someone fortunate enough to have the extra money to do what you want, then you can do what you want. You know, you can get a 4090 if you want, you know, get what you want ultimately. But don't feel the need or pressure to upgrade if you don't actually need to, right? Ferris says, thanks so much for your time and the quality that you produce. No problem, man. I just hope you find it helpful. Cheers and thanks for the answer. Ovidu says, do you have a laptop with a Ryzen 7945HX? If yes, can you test the Cinebench R23 on a 13900HX versus 7845HX in dual load? I like having Cyberpunk opened and running Cinebench R23. So I did a bunch of CPU benchmarks with the Ryzen 9 7945HX. I can show you the video. It's actually one of my most popular recent videos. So if I show you this. So here I did a bunch of tests with the Ryzen 9 7945HX versus the Intel i9 13980HX. It's almost got 100,000 views now. And then I did an unboxing of the Zephyrus G16 with the Ryzen 9 7945HX as well here. So if you want to see a bunch of benchmarks with the Ryzen 9 7945HX versus the Intel i9, I would recommend checking out that live stream. Yeah. So hope that should answer your question. I don't really see the point in trying to run Cyberpunk and Cinebench R23 at the same time, though. It's interesting. All right. Johan says, I'll take a couple more questions and then we'll end the live stream. Johan says, what would be a very generic GPU benchmark to run? Timespy. 3D Mark Timespy is, I think, the most comparable benchmark across the reviews and still does a pretty good job giving you the raw GPU performance. It's not perfect, especially in games that are CPU bound or CPU limited or have frame generation with ray tracing and DLSS and all of that. But yeah, 3D Mark Timespy is the one I would run for not including frame generation or ray tracing performance if you just want raw GPU power tested. And then if you want frame generation and GPU power tested, then I would look at game testing with Cyberpunk 2077 or Hogwarts being tested. Those are probably the two most reliable game tests with that technology right now. Jay says, wow, you're my favorite. I always wanted a PC setup like that, but I don't have enough subscribers or money. Can you send a link to pay if that's okay with you? I really want that setup with that PC and stuff. What? Okay, sweet. So there's the live stream, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you in the next one. Jay, if you're actually serious about buying my desktop, I would consider selling it maybe. But I'm keeping the monitor. Okay, peace.